Joel, Bear whispered softly. Joel, wake up. I opened my eyes and sat up slightly to see her on alert. She was looking out the window and listening for something. After a moment, I heard it. The tapping of water droplets against the window and roof, as well as the occasional screech of the creature that waited for us outside. Is that rain? I asked. She nodded slowly. Is everything okay? Why is the curator freaking out? I'm not sure. I just woke up a second before you did. There was a loud creaky noise and then the rain started. I don't think that thing likes the water. A moment after she said that, we listened as it poured hard against the walls of the house, begging to get in. I stood and helped Bear up, then crossed to the door and threw it open. I was surprised to see Ethan standing there with his hand raised about to knock. All good. You're awake. Have you seen Bear? She's not... He noticed the girl standing behind me and a flustered look ignited across his face. Oh, there you are. I didn't realize you were... I was just worried when you weren't in your room. Oh, sorry. Joel and I couldn't sleep, so we were just keeping each other company, Bea nervously admitted. Oh, it's all good. No big deal. I was just worried. All went silent, the halls filled only with the gentle patter of rain and awkward tension. What's going on? I asked, changing the conversation. Is everything alright? I'm not sure. The pipes just started creaking a second ago and now water's spraying down from the ceiling outside. Weird. Daniel! Bear yelled over the railing. You're right down there.
Yeah.
He called up as he appeared in the entryway below. You guys hearing this? Uh-huh. Definitely weird. Dan made his way up and joined us. And that stupid thing is out there, which means we aren't going anywhere. I really hope this water is just a routine thing that happens in this room and isn't a sign for something else. Man, why'd you have to see that? Now you know something bad's gonna happen. Ethan sighed. Come on, he said, patting him on the shoulder. There's some food downstairs. Man, this place even has food. Sort of. Everything like bread and fruit rotted in the pantry a while ago, but there's a lot of cans and boxes of stuff. Just don't open the fridge. I don't want to know what's in there. Oh, Bear said with a laugh as she started down the steps. Ethan followed and I did as well, but I looked back just in time to see Daniel looking at the bathroom door he had asked us to keep shut. I could see his hand was clenched into a fist. I cleared my throat and he turned to me. Sorry, he said before starting down. That day went by agonizingly slowly. The curator didn't stop screaming the entire time as water rained down onto it. Sometimes we would catch a glimpse of it through the curtain in the window, violently scrubbing away at its patchy, lumpy skin as if trying to brush off the water. At one point, when Ethan checked, he said that he saw a piece of its skin come loose, and from beneath it a pair of binoculars came tumbling out. We heard it scream wildly in anger before it snatched them back and shoved them under a different fold of skin. We stopped checking after that. The four of us just sat in the living room and played games for most of the day to pass the time. Luckily, Daniel had a stash of actual board games, and we all rejoiced at the prospect of playing something other than cards for a change. Some of us were a little happier than others, however. The whole time we interacted, it was mainly Bear and Ethan carrying the conversation. Daniel and I weren't really in a talking mood. His reason was obvious. This was his room, and he had already put it all together that the chances of him leaving were incredibly low. I could tell he was also distraught for us. Every now and then, someone would make a joke or remark that he enjoyed, and I would see him hold eye contact for a moment with a longing gaze as if he knew it might be the last time ever hearing such a thing. I was upset for all the same reasons. I wasn't going to lose Daniel. I refused to. I spent more time thinking of ways that we might be able to get him out of here. That was my primary focus. That's what I did rather than strategizing in the game of Stratego we'd been playing. I racked my brain thinking about all of the rules I had learned of the house. Any detail I could think of that might help break Dan out of this prison he found himself in. I came up blank every time. In the end, I always knew too little, and every plan always hinged too much on the what-ifs. On the other side of things, the guilt was killing me in more ways than one. I was the only one who currently knew Daniel's fate, and I could tell that he would rather me keep it that way. I did so, but hiding such a bombshell from Ethan and Bear felt like a boulder in my stomach. We had always told each other everything. Ever since we got here, how we were feeling, what we were afraid of, what our thoughts on everything was, and all were. But I knew that right now telling them was more stress than Dan needed and would only cause panic. I kept kicking myself over and over again. Why did I let him come down here with me? Why didn't I just go alone, sneak out like Andy did? That thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. Why didn't you just go with Andy in the first place? Everybody, wake up! Grace wiped the sleep from her eyes. Joel, what's wrong, dear? Why are you... Andy's gone. She left. I yelled through the sobs catching in my throat. I was hysterical. I didn't know what to do. How far had she gone? How long had she left? Of all nights to get a good sleep, it had to be the one where she decided to sneak off. My brain had already gone to the worst places. She was dead, or at least going to be. There was no way she could survive on her own down there with that thing. I had to go after her. I needed to find her. Maybe she was still okay and I could catch up to her. Daniel sat up. Whoa, Joe, calm down. What's going on? Andy's gone. I woke up and she wasn't here, so I went to find her in the pantry. It's... I couldn't even force the sentence out. Instead, I turned to my belongings and dropped to my knees, emptying everything I didn't need and cramming back in the things that I would. As I did, Frank, Claire, and Ethan immediately stood up and ran out of the bedroom door to check for themselves. "Are you sure?" Jan questioned. "Are you sure she's not outside?" "Yes, the bodies are out there, and there's only 6 rooms in this damn house. It's not like she's playing hide and seek." Daniel suddenly noticed what I was busy with and spoke up. "What are you doing, Joe? Joe,
What?
what are you doing?"
I'm going after her."
The room filled with gasps and murmurs of panic. "Like hell you are."
"She's down there, Dan. I can't just let her get herself killed."
"Why would she even do something like that?" Ben laminated. "What was she thinking?" The question felt like a bullet tearing its way through my throat. I knew why. I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking about it because of me. Because she thinks the exit's down there. I finished packing and slung the bag over my shoulder. Without hesitation, I rushed back out the door and into the hall. Everyone hopped up and followed behind as I turned and slammed into Ethan, who was on his way back. "He's right," Claire confirmed in a shaky voice. "She's not here." I didn't stop to indulge. I blew past the 3 and made my way to the kitchen. I grabbed the knob and threw the door open, and the yellow room greeted me with its hug of stale air. I was about to step through when a hand grabbed my shoulder and yanked me back inside. Daniel slammed the door and then released his grip. "Are you crazy?"
"Joel, don't."
Jan begged. I could see everyone else wore faces of concern and were starting to well up as they began to take on the same grief that I had a few moments ago.
"I need to go after her."
"John, you need to calm down."
"And then what?" I snapped. "I calm down and then she's still out there. It doesn't change anything. She's going to die if someone doesn't go help her."
"You're gonna die if you go down there without thinking."
"I don't care."
"Well, I do!" Dan yelled louder than intended. It was enough to make me wince. I could see his face ease into a look of shame as his eyes darted to the floor. I took a moment to look back at everyone else. At this point, most everyone was sobbing. Ethan and Bear held each other. Jan cried in disbelief. Mark and Benjamin just leaned against the wall and slowly slid down to the floor with watery eyes. They were already hurting. I was only adding fuel to the fire by the way I was acting. This isn't what they needed right now. I turned back to Dan, who sheepishly continued. "We'll do." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Look at me. I know you're upset. I think we all are. We just need to take a second, okay? We'll figure this out. We never heard that thing last night, right? That means she made it out okay, and Andy's a smart girl. She's going to be okay for now. But if you run down there while you don't have a plan, you might not be." I didn't say anything. More tears just fell from my eyes as I looked at the floor. "I don't think you're in any state to be going down into something, somewhere so dangerous." "I need to... Daniel, I need to find her." I know. We all do. But when you're acting this impulsive, you can't. I'll go."
"What?"
Jan said, perking up. "I'm gonna go down. I'm the only one here who's been down there. I remember most of the layout. If that thing's down there, I think I can sneak around it. Daniel, Ben muttered. We don't have time to argue. If we want to find her, this is the only way.
I want to go with you.
John, no. I just told you why that's not a good idea. I wanted to argue, but when I locked eyes with Dan, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. His eyes were watery and full of sorrow. He was grieving just as much as I was. She's gone, Dan. I mumbled. Sobs began to break through my voice again. She's gone. He pulled me into his arms and held me tight. Not yet, kid. We don't know that.
Joel. Huh? It's your turn.
Sorry. I zoned out for a second. I said as I turned to investigate the board. Bear exchanged glances with Ethan before adding,
Are you guys alright?
What?
You both seem really out of it.
Yeah, I'm fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just hate being cooped up in here is all. Same here, Daniel lied. Still not used to being back in my old home yet. I looked at Dan and he looked at me, and then we both darted our eyes to the board. Bear and Ethan clearly caught the look but decided not to say anything. Instead, Ethan spoke. Wait, did you guys hear that? I listened to the sound of rain pattering on the roof, but when I didn't hear anything else, I returned. No. What? Exactly. That thing isn't screaming anymore. We all listened again for a moment, and when we realized that Ethan was right, we slowly stood. Bear crossed to the window and pulled the curtains back just enough to look out, then softly said, Uh-oh. What is it? See for yourself. We all joined her at the portal and gazed out as she drew the shades all the way. Outside, the water continued bucketing down. However, to our lack of checking, we hadn't noticed it was coming down so much it was beginning to flood the streets. The places where sewer grates once were now were overflowing and pulling with water, and the roads themselves had turned into foot-deep rivers that flowed slowly across the way. The thing from downstairs perched atop of the roof of a house, staring down at the water the way a cat might look at a full bathtub. Upon seeing us, it let out one last squeal, throwing a tantrum of fist pounds against the shingles, then vaulted off somewhere behind the structure. We listened as it squealed away into the distance until eventually we didn't hear it at all.
Thank goodness.
Bear sighed under her breath. Better wait a bit before we go back out there, Daniel suggested, just in case. Ethan nodded. Then we can get the keys to your old car and get out of here. Daniel and I looked at each other again, but we didn't linger on it this time.
We may not want to wait too long, though. It looks like that water is getting deeper and deeper,
Bear noted. She was right. None of it appeared to be draining, only pooling more and more by the hour. To compensate, we waited for about 30 minutes before making our way over to the doorway of the garage. Daniel peeked his head out first, then opened the door. When he saw that it was clear, "You kids wait here a second," he said before stepping off the landing into a flat concrete floor. Through the garage door we could see the Fox rain falling like a waterfall from the darkness above. By this point the flood was so high it surpassed the street curb and was slowly creeping up the driveway. We better hurry or we may be swimming back over to the exit. I joked nervously. I didn't like that it was collecting so fast. At first I thought it might just be some weird simulation of rain to fit the reality of the neighborhood, but the fact that it was flooding seemed intentional, and I didn't want to hang around long enough to figure out why. Bear Ethan and I watched as Daniel crossed over to his now famed Ferrari. I was never a big car person, but even I could appreciate its value and beauty. The vehicle was sleek and spotless, and the shiny yellow frame was slender and clearly built for speed. The black-tinted windows reflected Daniel as clear as a mirror as he approached and pulled the handle to the door. It opened wide, and the light within slowly glowed to life as if it was welcoming its owner back after his long years away. Daniel didn't seem to care at all, however. He simply slid into the passenger seat and opened the middle compartment, then reached inside, shuffling around its contents. "Man, what on earth did you do for a living, Dan?" Ethan asked. Daniel laughed. "I was an accountant for a company that manufactured car engines." "Dang, really? I didn't realize you were smart." "Some might say I'm not." After a moment he came back out with a small black car remote, then pressed a silver button on its side, unfolding the key. He smirked. "Glad I got a spare." "Keeping a spare key inside your Ferrari might be why, some people may not think you ain't smart." "Watch yourself." We all stepped down the landing and gathered by Daniel, then turned to the pouring rain outside the garage door. "Well, should we get moving?" "That's probably the best idea." "You wouldn't happen to have any umbrellas, would you?" "I think we're gonna need something more heavy duty, especially for all the water on the ground." "Come on, it doesn't look deep. I have some old fishing boots that might get us there, without getting hypothermia." We all walked upstairs to Daniel's closet in the master bedroom. He began to pass out jackets that he had and fitted us each with a pair of boots, some of them in better shape than others. I slipped into a new coat and then reached down into my pocket. I retrieved a faded, crumpled note and went to slide it into a pouch on my bag where it would be safe if it got wet. As I did, I traced its edge, considering a look. I knew the words by heart, but even still, I never felt like I read them enough. After we all changed, we reassembled in the living room, and with a simple nod to one another and a twirl of the key around Daniel's finger, we stepped out into the streets again. The water came down in thick droplets that would have simply felt like rain were it not for how messy it felt. The flood was cold, and I was glad Daniel suggested that we tried to stay as dry as possible. It would probably take weeks for our clothes to dry once we got out of the water. And with how frigid it was, our health would have probably been severely at risk. We all sloshed through the water in a diamond formation, although we said very little as we travelled back to the door. Besides, with the pummeling flow from above harshly meeting the liquid below, it was hard to hear anything other than the sound of our boots wading through the murk. It was now 3/4 the way up our calves, and we made sure to walk slowly as not to let any slosh over inside our boots. I caught Dan looking down at the water with a blank expression at one point. He wasn't even watching where he was going. It looked like he was on autopilot. After a moment, however, I saw him take a deep breath and then return his gaze forward. It was an action that I knew well. He was swallowing some sort of emotion deep down in an attempt to drown it. I couldn't tell whether it was because of what he and I knew or something else. "You can feel it, can't you?" he said, barely emerging his face above the water's surface. I didn't respond. I was done indulging my insane imagination. "This is all going too well. Nothing's been this easy so far. You know that. I know that." My boots sloshed onward through the black, murky water. "The key isn't going to work. And then you're going to be stuck here. Stuck with old man Daniel. Or maybe there's something else in here with you. Just waiting for the right moment to strike. Maybe that moment is now, while you're defensively coasting through the water, or maybe it's both." I resisted the urge to quit back. Just ignore him. He's not saying anything that matters anyway. "So you're not talking to me now, huh? Boy, really doing anything you can to avoid your problems, brother?" Not a word in return. He smiled and stared straight up from the water with soulless eyes. "Kinda reminds me of how you were before you left home. Ignoring my existence. So you don't have to confront the mess you made." I clenched my fists and tried to focus straight ahead. If I keep ignoring it, it would stop. Right? But you and I both know that's not how it works, Joel. Ignoring things, running from them, it doesn't change what you did. "Please stop," I muttered. "That's what's got you so worried, isn't it? After all these years, I think you're starting to figure this place out. What the rooms are." My heart began to pound fast. Why was my imagination doing this to me? Why would it do something that just caused more pain? But then again, part of you always knew, didn't it? Ever since you got here, you did. That conversation with Mark before he bit it was enough to sell you. But coming down here just confirmed it. "Stop!" I demanded. "What do you think your room is going to look like? If Daniel's looks like this, then you've probably got a good one in store." "Shut up!" "What skeletons do you think he's hiding anyways? A place like this dead daughter. Maybe you should ask him. It might help shed some light on the way out of here. Well, for you three at least. He suddenly lifted his head entirely from the water and began drifting slowly to me, his neck stretching like a serpent. I don't think he's going anywhere. I lifted my boot from the water and brought it down hard onto his face. Water splashed violently outwards, soaking beer from behind and filling my boot to the brim with icy cold water. I recoiled suddenly in shock and stumbled backwards, nearly tumbling entirely into the sea beneath me.
Joel, what the heck?
Bear scolded with rage as she turned around. When she saw me looking down at the water with a ghost-white face and a look of fear, however, her tone turned more sympathetic.
Joel, what's wrong?
I looked at the water for any signs of movement, anything that might be hiding below the surface. When I concluded that there was nothing, I wiped my face and turned to Bear. Oh, I'm really sorry. I almost tripped and had to catch myself. Her expression went back to annoyance, and she returned her gaze forward. Well, stay focused, kid. We're almost there, Daniel called from the front. I looked to the water one last time to where he had been, then scanned the surrounding area. There was absolutely nothing. It was nothing. It had to be nothing, right? Hallucinations. They could be that real. I tried to tell myself that because it hadn't been the cold water that shocked me out of my delusion at that moment. It was the face that I had felt the heel of my boot connect with. It was something other than the ground. After a while longer of slogging through the dark abyss, we finally reached the door. We had all but given up trying to keep the insides of our boots dry and instead just focused on moving faster. This was because the water seemed to be rising a lot quicker now, reaching the rim of our shoes by the time we hit the catwalk's edge. There was no longer a moat below us. It had risen up to spill over into the landmass. We would have hardly known there was a bridge if it weren't for the railings that stuck out above the water. Daniel reached the door first, then turned back and waited for the rest of us. He looked specifically at me with an intense dread, and I returned the same look as we both prepared for the worst.
What are you waiting for? Ethan asked. Let's leave before we have to drink our way out.
Alright. Dan shot back, a slight longing in his voice. He inserted the key and it slid in with the perfect shunk. I saw him take a deep breath, turn it and try the handle. Our collective hearts sank when we heard the metal bars resist. Dan looked back at me with a knowing glance.
Did it not work?
Bear asked. No, the key fits, but the door won't unlock.
Maybe it's the wrong key, Ethan suggested after a pause of thought. Some keys fit in locks but don't actually turn them.
It has to be this key, kid. It turns in everything.
Let me see.
Daniel stepped back and let Ethan try, but it yielded the same result. Dan looked up and closed his eyes before speaking again. Look, there's something that I need to...
Let's all try,
I blurted out before he could continue.
There's a ton of water piling up. Maybe the pressure is keeping it shut.
He gave an expression of sympathy and nodded. Sure, let's try that. I could tell he was just going along with it to make me feel better. He knew I wouldn't be content until we tried everything. We all managed to squeeze up close to the door and fit our hands on the handle. Then, all at once, we began tugging hard. Despite our best efforts, we didn't even manage a groan out of the thing.
Damn it!
Bear yelled, delivering a kick to the metallic surface and sending a wave of water splashing onto our faces. Ethan wiped the tsunami from his mug. Whoa. Cool it. We'll figure this out. Daniel turned to me. Joe, this isn't going to. No. I interrupted again.
Ethan tried too, Dan, so it can't be that.
Can't be what? Bear chimed in. I ignored her and continued. There has to be another way. Daniel, that ballerina who helped us upstairs knew where we were heading when we were looking for that key. That means she knew where it was, which means you do too. So just think for a moment. Is there any other key that would work? Daniel and I stared at each other for a long moment, me in desperation and him in distress before his eyes suddenly widened. These are just the spare keys. We need the real ones. Okay, I said with a breath of relief. Where are they? His face contorted for a second before he spoke again. They're in the bathroom upstairs at my house. Bear made a confused face. Bathroom? Why were they there? Because my daughter loved them. They'd keep her calm during baths. The air felt heavy as more pieces of the puzzle slid into place. Nobody spoke for a moment, and only the sounds of pattering water could be heard. That was until something broke the silence. Far off from the dark void to our right, we heard crying, horrific, sobbing sounds of agony. The sounds were from someone young, infantile. The kind of cries that babies make when they're scared or in pain. The hair on my neck stood on end as the sound echoed through the rain and shadow to meet us. Dan's face had changed entirely from the usual fear and sadness he had recently been wearing. Now it was pure panic and horror. Horror unlike anything I had seen him wear before. No, he muttered over and over as if he was trying to convince himself that none of this was real. Dan, Bear whispered with hardly any breath. What is it? Daniel's breathing was hard and fast like a racehorse. His eyes were wide and his jaw was clenched. I didn't expect him to be able to speak, but he did. We need to get off this bridge. Run. Run back to the house. We looked at him hoping for more answers, but he didn't give us any. Go! I started leading the way back down the catwalk. The group in tow, the water was now at our waist, as it had reached during our time standing there, and every step felt like I was running through tar. People often have nightmares where they can't run fast from something that's chasing them. But until you've experienced it in real life, I don't think you could even fathom how genuinely terrifying it really is. The crying suddenly subsided as we reached the road again. It faded into a gargle before stopping altogether. That was when I gave up running. I dove forward and started furiously paddling, checking over my shoulder quickly to make sure my friends were still with me. They too had abandoned their legs and were tossing in the water. We swam fast through the dark, and I was thankful that the flashlight I had found was waterproof for us. We wouldn't have known where we were going. With every stroke through the murk, I prayed that whatever it was with us wouldn't be in front of me. We reached the intersection of Daniel's Road and began swimming down just in time for the streetlights to come on. My prayer was unanswered. Stretching high above the water, the orange bulbs clicked on one by one, illuminating the scene before us. Thick white ropes floating lazily among the flood, drifting up to the surface, only to be buried by the falling rain moments later. Their texture was slick and slimy. They were tangled and crossed back and forth down the middle of the street like a boiling pot of spaghetti. 5 feet away from me was what looked like a plastic bag drifting lazily in my direction. I thought that maybe it was, until the light ahead of me shined a spotlight down on top of it. It was a tiny figure, a baby, a fetus. But it certainly wasn't. Its skin was too distorted, too warped. It was bloated and far too long. Its eyes were nothing but soulless black beads that bore right through me from beneath the dark swell. The cords that invaded the streets plugged themselves into various spots around its body as it moved towards me. It dragged them along with it. Further down the road, I could see more of them, all curled into balls as they drifted closer. I watched as the nearest one to me opened its mouth beneath the water and began emanating a muffled sob that bubbled and gasped to the surface. Not wasting any time, I launched myself back, stretching my arms out and knitting my friends. I could hear Bear start to protest, but as soon as everyone took the sight in for themselves, they followed suit. We all turned and paddled back the way we came, but it was too late. We could already see more jellyfish-like tubes approaching.
Shit, what do we do?
Ethan yelled. I looked around quickly. Daniel was in sheer panic, panting hard with eyes wide. Bear struggled to open her jacket and retrieve the gun that I had hoped still worked, and Ethan moved closer to huddle up to everyone. Off to our left, I suddenly noticed a clearing in the tentacles, a spot where they hadn't reached yet. Beyond, a raised porch led back up to safety, and a fence connected to its side. If we could reach it, if we could walk to the edge of the wall back to Dan's house, from there I had no idea.
Over there, the red house.
I screamed over the sea and sobbing of rainfall. I took off, leading the way through the wake as everyone followed, looking both ways. I saw the fetus things were quickly closing in. They glided through the water with a jerky, thrashing motion of their bodies, and their cords did the same, stretching outward with a mind of their own. I hit the porch first, climbing halfway onto the steps, then turned back to help the others. Bear took my hand and hauled herself out, then withdrew the gun. The pale, slimy ropes were now only 10 feet away and began to spread further apart, casting a vile net of flesh. Daniel was next, but he didn't need any assistance. He launched himself forward on sheer adrenaline alone and hoisted himself up from the floor, looking back at the pursuers in utter horror. As Ethan swam, he yelped when a rope drifted close to his side, and he quickly flipped into a backstroke to avoid it. His butt hit the stairs, and I bent over to grab his jacket, but I wasn't the only thing that had a grip on him. A tentacle barely caught his leg, and the muscle within tightened. "Ethan!" I yelled as his legs were abruptly yanked back into the water. I took a step down off the porch and pulled back with all my might, but there was no give at all. Another tendril drifted close and wrapped around him once more, further up the leg this time. I pulled him in further, and Ethan looked back at me with an expression of pure fear. "Joel, you have to let go." "No! It's gonna take you in too." I ignored and continued tugging. It was no use. I felt my feet slipping, and I fell down onto my tailbone, my boots sinking below the water once again. Behind, I felt Daniel grab onto me and begin assisting, but even with two of us, Ethan was only getting pulled further in. The fetus that had him raised its head above the water and made its muffled cries known over the sound of the chaos. "Let me go!" Ethan screamed. "No, I won't let you!" Bang! The water by the fetus's head exploded, sending a shower of liquid launching high. The noise was so jarring that my hand slipped a bit, causing my grip to slide from Ethan's shoulder. Immediately I scrambled for his hood, catching it with the tips of my fingers. More fleshy tumors were upon us now, and they too were reaching out for Ethan. I began to panic, demanding that my body pull harder, but I was only rewarded by slipping further into the pool. Ethan was up to his neck now, and I let out a loud scream of defiance. I was not going to lose him. I could not lose any one of the only friends I had left. I was going to die before I let him go. Bang! Flesh and dark crimson burst into the water surrounding us, and then the tentacles that had held Ethan loosened their grip. Wasting no time, he yanked them off, and then in the same instant, Daniel and I pulled him onto the porch. I looked over my shoulder to see Bear lower the pistol with shaking hands, partially from shivering, partially from fear. "Nice shot," I offered between breaths. She nodded and gave me a very pitiful smile. We looked back at the water to see the creature Bear had just shot was floating lifelessly as rain relentlessly beat against its corpse. The others brushed by the unmoving chunks of flesh without a second thought and made their way to the edge of the porch. The four of us scrambled against the walls of the house and held our breaths as we waited to see what happened next. But relief found us as we watched them bounce harmlessly against the wall, unable to pull their limp bodies from the water. I breathed a sigh of relief and then turned to everyone. "You okay, Ethan?" "Yeah, it didn't hurt me at all. Just tried to pull me in and I swallowed a bit of water, but other than that, all good." I nodded. "Dan?" Dan tore his eyes away from the corpse and looked at me. I couldn't tell if the water streaming down his face was from the rain or from tears. He wiped all of it away and replied, Yeah, I'm alright." Good. I gave Bear a quick chicken look. that she affirmed before continuing. This fence over here, we should be able to balance on it and take it back to the house. We can also take the backyards as well. It doesn't look like they can climb. Nobody had any qualms with that idea. Together we hoisted up the slick fence and began inching our way across it. Behind us, the babies in the water all wailed and gargled below the surface. Once we reached the wall of the house next door, we stopped, hopped off our perch and splashed into the lake that formed in the backyard. From there we swam and climbed through several yards until we were once again standing before Daniel's house. How are we going to get in? They're going to be in front of the garage. The back door, Daniel replied. I left it unlocked before we left. Figured you'll never know that we may need to go back in. I guess in this case it was the right call. We shambled through the water and felt around for the steps to the deck. The flood was up to mid-chest and only the railings protruded from the water now. Peering in the back door, we saw that a foot of water had taken over the first floor of the house, and as Dan slid it open, the glass more flowed in. We sloshed inside, but suddenly stopped when we heard the sound of rushing water coming from the entryway. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was loud enough to tickle and warrant alertness. Daniel brushed past us and took the lead. Careful, Dan, Bear called after him. We each slowly rounded the corners to see that a steady waterfall was gently cascading down the steps. We may not have been able to see the source, but all of us knew exactly where it was coming from. Daniel placed his hands on the railing, but didn't bother to move up at all. He just stood there with his eyes locked on the bathroom door, breathing almost inaudibly. Ethan, Bear, and I didn't say anything. We waited until he was ready. Without a word, he slowly took the first step, then another and another, carefully repeating the process until he stood at the top of the stairs. We followed slowly behind, making sure not to slip on the slick steps, but halting again when Daniel placed his hand on the doorknob. We could hear a stream of water pouring into a full bathtub from the other side. The three of us shifted glances to another, waiting for the next move when Daniel suddenly placed his forehead against the door. We were confused until we heard a soft sob coming from him. Instantly, Bear crossed the rest of the way and stood next to him, then slowly wrapped him in a hug. Ethan and I followed suit. You know, I was so excited to be a dad, Daniel began. When my wife told me, I was ecstatic. We immediately started talking about names, whether it be a boy or a girl, whose eyes they would have. The day after we knew, I tore down the guest room and started making renovations. Bought a crib and toys and everything I knew we would need. He glanced over his shoulder at the door, covered in butterflies and bees. I wanted to do everything right, you know. My dad, he wasn't ever around. I wanted to be different. I wanted to love her more than anyone else in this world. In all my spare time, I research things, the best diets for infants, what birth defects were common and how best to handle them, what to do if they choked, how to perform CPR on. His voice caught in his throat before he could finish the last part of his sentence, and instead only a shaky breath came out as tears ran down his cheek. "It's okay, Dan," Bear gently reassured. Daniel didn't respond. He just shook his head and turned the knob to the door. Inside was a dark bathroom with a sink, toilet, and a large overflowing bathtub. The faucet continued to pour gallon after gallon of water into the basin that refused to hold any more. Instead, it flowed outwards, past us and down the steps to join the flood below. Daniel sloshed into the room and stepped by the counter. A ring of keys sat. One proudly displayed the Ferrari logo. He picked them up and stared longingly at them. When she was born, it was the best day of my life. I took paternity leave and then some to make sure I was home as much as possible. I wanted to be involved, you know. Work had me so busy, I knew that once I went back I wasn't going to be around as much. When it was time, I tried working from home for a bit. It was stressful, juggling a kid and managing a company's finances. But I didn't care. She was more important. But then... His voice caught again. As he moved towards the tub, he stared into the water and, sob by sob, broke down. This time, none of us stepped over to confront him. I could sense that it wasn't what he wanted. They kept calling to pile more and more on. My boss told me that there would be some repercussions if I wasn't more present. So I started trying harder. Anytime they called, I would answer. He slowly sat on the edge of the bathtub and reached over to the faucet, placing his hand on the handle. Daniel struggled hard to continue. At this point, we knew it wasn't for our sakes. He needed to confront this. One day, my wife left to go and get groceries. She asked me to give our daughter a bath. It wasn't deep. I knew better. I also knew better than to leave her alone. But still, the phone rang. And I thought, I thought that it would only be for a second. I was so tired. And I didn't think that... He turned the handle with a creak of pipes, then slowly the flow trickled to a stop. Daniel slid from the edge of the tub to the floor and stared at the center of the room as he forced himself to finish between broken emotions and labored breaths. I tried everything while the paramedics came. but she wouldn't wake up. CPR didn't work. Trying to give her oxygen didn't work. Begging her to wake up didn't work. It was too late for any of that. I let my daughter die because He looked at the keys in his hand and angrily lobbed them out of the door against the hallway wall. I belong here. This is what I deserve. He buried his face into his arms and knees and let the grief take over as bare Ethan and I stared at one another. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody wanted to move. Nobody wanted to do anything. After a moment, I looked back at Daniel and then silently stepped into the room with him, sliding against the vanity and sitting in the puddle. After a moment, Ethan and Bear did the same. Our thoughts on what happened were irrelevant. What was done was done. We knew that, and Daniel certainly did as well. Nothing we could do was going to cure that. Dan hated himself. And that wasn't going to change either. So instead, we just sat with a man who was broken and hoped that was enough. Kia ora te whānau. Grim here. Thank you for making it to the end of the story, if you did. Oh man, I think I got too heavy into character there. Oh, give me a second. Oh, that was a good story. You know, it's a good story when you can feel some of the emotions that they're going through. Hey, maybe that's just what I'm feeling because, you know, I'm the one who's been reading this since the start. So I feel like I'm kind of growing with the characters as they go through. God, I'm so silly. Let's not focus on that. Anyway, thank you very much for coming through. It was a good time. I enjoyed narrating the story, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I'll be aiming to get another one up in about 2 weeks. Sorry I missed this week, had some sick family members, so I kind of fell behind with the last little bit of recording. But we got there in the end, and that's all that matters. This is an hour long, minus me taking the 28 hours at the end of this to talk. So please feel free to go back and listen to the others if you've got more. Once I complete the 26 chapters, so we are now 13, we're halfway through. Once I complete the 26 chapters, I will make one large one. I'm going to make one large one that covers from chapter 1 to 13, and then I'll do chapter 13 to 26, and if I can, I'll do a full 2-hour, it'll be like 20-hour long story, so we'll see how we get on. But anyway, I'm Grim, and as always, be safe wherever you are. Have an amazing night or day, and I'm, well, signing off.